Robert Martinez was sitting in his favorite leather armchair, the one his late wife Carmen had bought him for their 20th anniversary, when the phone call came that would change everything. The afternoon sun streamed through the bay windows of his Denver home, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors he had installed with his own hands 30 years ago. At 72, Robert still maintained the strong frame of a man who had spent decades in construction, building houses and dreams with equal determination. His calloused hands gripped the phone as his daughter's voice cut through the peaceful silence of his retirement like a cold blade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dad, we need to talk. It's about your living situation. The tone in Miranda's voice carried an authority that Robert hadn't heard since she was a teenager, defying his rules about curfew and dating. Now, at 45, she wielded that same commanding presence in her role as a successful real estate agent in Boulder, but this time it was directed at him with surgical precision. "What about my living situation?" Robert asked, though something in his chest already knew where this conversation was heading. He had been dreading this moment for months, ever since Miranda had started making comments about his age, his independence, his ability to maintain the three-bedroom ranch house that had been home to the Martinez family for over 3 decades. "You can't keep living alone in that big house, Dad. It's not safe anymore. Last week you forgot to turn off the stove, and Mrs. Patterson from next door told me she saw you struggling with the garbage cans again." Robert's jaw tightened. Evelyn Patterson, the neighborhood busybody who had appointed herself as an unofficial monitor of his daily activities. He had known her for 20 years, had helped her husband fix their fence more times than he could count, and now she was reporting on him like he was some kind of invalid? "I forgot to turn off the stove once, Miranda, once, and those garbage cans are heavier than they used to be because the city changed the pickup schedule. I was managing just fine." "Dad, please listen to me. I've been doing research, and there are some wonderful assisted living facilities in the area. Clean, safe, with medical staff on site 24 hours a day. You'd have your own apartment, meals provided, activities with other people your age. You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or yard work or any of those things that are getting harder for you." The words hit Robert like physical blows. Assisted living. The euphemism that people used when they meant nursing home, when they meant warehousing the elderly until they died. He thought about Carmen, who had passed away 3 years ago after a brief battle with cancer, and how she had made him promise to fight for his independence, to never let anyone put him somewhere he didn't want to be. "I'm not going to a nursing home, Miranda. This is my house. This is where your mother and I raised you and your brother. This is where she died, in our bedroom, holding my hand. I'm not leaving." "Dad, you're being stubborn. This isn't about what you want anymore. It's about what's practical, what's safe. I've already made appointments for us to tour 3 facilities next week. Sunset Manor has an excellent reputation, and they have an opening in their memory care unit." Memory care unit. Robert felt his blood pressure rising. "There's nothing wrong with my memory, Miranda. I remember every conversation we've had about this, every hint you've dropped, every concerned look you've given me when you think I'm not paying attention. My mind is as sharp as it's ever been." "Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be. David and I have discussed this extensively, and we both agree that it's time. You can't live alone anymore. What if you fall and can't get up? What if you have a medical emergency in the middle of the night? What if there's a fire and you can't get out quickly enough?" David, his son, the accountant in Phoenix who called once a month and visited twice a year. Robert should have known that Miranda wasn't acting alone in this campaign to uproot his life. The 2 siblings had always been close, had always presented a united front when they wanted something from their parents. When they were children, it had been charming. Now it felt like a conspiracy. "I have a medical alert button," Robert said, touching the device that hung around his neck. "I've never fallen, my reflexes are fine, and I've been handling emergencies my entire adult life. I built houses for 40 years, Miranda. I know how to take care of myself and my property." "That was different. You were younger then. Things change, Dad. Bodies change. You're not the same person you were at 50 or even 60. It's time to accept that." The dismissal in her voice stung more than Robert wanted to admit. He looked around the living room, at the family photos covering the mantelpiece, at the worn spots on the carpet where he and Carmen had danced to old records, at the bookshelf filled with volumes on construction, history, and the mystery novels that Carmen had loved. Every corner of this house held memories, stories, pieces of a life well lived. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked quietly. Miranda's silence stretched uncomfortably before she answered. "We've been concerned for a while. Since Mom died, really. You've been isolated. You don't take care of yourself the way you should, and the house is getting run down. When was the last time you had the furnace serviced? When did you last paint the exterior? The gutters are full of leaves, the driveway has cracks, and your garden looks like a wilderness." Each criticism felt like a personal attack. Robert had maintained this property meticulously for decades, but since Carmen's death, some things had slipped. Not because he couldn't handle them, but because the motivation had been harder to find. Painting the house seemed pointless when Carmen wasn't there to admire the fresh color. Cleaning the gutters felt futile when there was no one to notice the difference. "I can hire people to help with maintenance," Robert said. "There are services for everything you mentioned. That doesn't mean I need to give up my home. Dad, it's not just about maintenance."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It's about your health, your safety, your quality of life. At Sunset Manor, you'd have social interaction, organized activities, proper nutrition. Right now, you're just existing, not living. The judgment in her words ignited something fierce in Robert's chest. Just existing. As if the life he had built, the routines he had established, the independence he had fought to maintain meant nothing. As if choosing to live quietly in his own home was somehow wrong or inadequate. "I am living, Miranda. I'm living the way I choose to live, in the place I choose to live. I read books, I tend my garden, I watch the news, I call my friends. I volunteer at the community center twice a week, teaching basic carpentry to young people who want to learn a trade. I'm not sitting in a corner waiting to die. But you're alone all the time. That's not healthy for someone your age. Isolation can lead to depression, cognitive decline, all sorts of problems. In a facility, you'd be around people, you'd have stimulation, structure." Robert thought about the residents he had seen during the few times he had visited friends in similar facilities. Elderly people sitting in wheelchairs staring at television screens, going through the motions of organized activities with vacant expressions, eating meals prepared by strangers in institutional kitchens. The stimulation Miranda described looked more like slow suffocation to him. "What if I refuse?" he asked. Another uncomfortable pause. "Dad, we really hope it doesn't come to that. We want this to be your choice. But if you're not capable of making good decisions about your own welfare, then David and I will have to explore other options." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Legal intervention, competency hearings. The power of attorney that he had granted to Miranda years ago, back when it seemed like a simple precaution, a way to handle his affairs if he ever became truly incapacitated, he had never imagined that she would use it as a weapon against his autonomy. "I see," Robert said, his voice carefully controlled. "And what's the timeline for this decision that you've already made for me? We've scheduled the tours for next Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. After that, we'll sit down as a family and decide which facility would be the best fit. I'm hoping to have you moved within the month." Within the month? 30 years of memories, 3 decades of life, reduced to a moving timeline that his daughter had created without consulting him. Robert felt something cold and hard settling in his stomach, a determination that he recognized from his younger days when contractors tried to cheat him or building inspectors attempted to push him around. "I'll think about it," he said, knowing that Miranda would interpret this as the beginning of his surrender. "I'm glad you're being reasonable, Dad. I know this is hard, but it's really for the best. You'll see that once you're settled somewhere safe and comfortable. I'll pick you up Monday morning at 9 for the first tour." After Miranda hung up, Robert sat in his chair for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across his living room. The house was quiet except for the familiar sounds that had become the soundtrack of his retirement. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock that had belonged to Carmen's parents, the distant murmur of traffic on the main road. He thought about Carmen, about the conversations they had during her final weeks when she was lucid enough to discuss the future. She had been worried about this exact scenario, had made him promise that he wouldn't let their children make decisions for him out of misguided concern or convenience. "You're stronger than they think you are, Robert," she had said, her voice weak but her eyes still fierce with the determination that had attracted him to her 50 years earlier. "Don't let them put you in a box just because it makes them feel better about their own lives." At the time, he had assured her that Miranda and David would never do such a thing, that they respected his independence and his judgment. He had been wrong about his children, just as he had been wrong about so many things in the years since Carmen's death. Robert stood up from his chair, his joints protesting slightly, but his movements still strong and sure. He walked to the kitchen, where Carmen's recipe box still sat on the counter next to the coffee maker, and pulled out the phone book. It took him several minutes to find what he was looking for, but eventually he located the number for Douglas & Associates, the law firm that had handled his and Carmen's wills 20 years ago. The receptionist who answered the phone was polite but hurried. "Mr. Martinez, I'm afraid Mr. Douglas retired 5 years ago. The firm is now handled by his daughter, Sarah Douglas Chen. Would you like me to schedule an appointment?" Robert looked at the calendar hanging next to the refrigerator, the one where Carmen used to write down doctor's appointments and social events in her careful handwriting. The pages for the past 3 years had been mostly blank, except for the occasional medical checkup or visit from Miranda and her family. "Yes," he said, "as soon as possible. It's regarding property law and family matters. I have an opening tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, if that works for you." "Perfect, I'll be there." After making the appointment, Robert walked through his house with new eyes, seeing it not as the comfortable home it had been for 3 decades, but as the asset it represented. The property had appreciated significantly over the years, particularly as Denver's real estate market had exploded. The house itself was solid, well-built, situated on nearly an acre of land in a neighborhood that developers were increasingly interested in. Miranda had mentioned the declining condition of the property, but Robert knew that most of the issues she had cited were cosmetic or easily addressed. The foundation was sound, the roof was less than 10 years old, and the electrical and plumbing systems had been updated within the past 15 years. What Miranda saw as deterioration, Robert recognized as deferred maintenance that could be corrected with time and money. More importantly, he knew exactly what the house was worth because Miranda had told him during one of her recent visits. She had been researching property values in the neighborhood, ostensibly to help him understand his financial situation, but now Robert suspected that she had been evaluating the asset that she and David expected to inherit. The house could easily sell for $800,000, maybe $900,000 if the market stays hot. That would give you a substantial nest egg for your care, Dad. You wouldn't have to worry about money. At the time, Robert had been touched by what seemed like genuine concern for his financial security. Now he understood that Miranda had been calculating the resources that would be available to pay for his institutionalization, planning his future with the cold efficiency of a real estate agent evaluating a property for sale. That evening, Robert made himself a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables, the kind of meal that Carmen used to insist was good for his health. He ate at the kitchen table, where they had shared thousands of meals over the years, where they had discussed their children's progress in school, their hopes for retirement, their dreams of travel and grandchildren. After dinner, he called his neighbor Tom Nguyen, who lived 3 houses down and had become a casual friend over the past few years. Tom was a recent retiree himself, a former engineer who had moved to Denver from California to be closer to his adult children. "Robert, good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "I've been better, Tom. I was wondering if you might have some time to talk in person. I could use some advice about a family situation."
Of course. Why don't you come over for coffee tomorrow morning? Susan's visiting her sister this week, so I've got plenty of time. Robert appreciated that Tom didn't press for details over the phone. In the 3 years since Carmen's death, Tom had been one of the few people who treated Robert as a competent adult rather than a potential problem to be managed. The next morning, Robert walked the 4 blocks to Tom's house, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the familiar rhythm of the neighborhood. Children were waiting for school buses, parents were heading to work, and the daily routine of suburban life was playing out around him. This was his community. These were his streets. and the thought of leaving it all behind for the sterile environment of an assisted living facility made his chest tight with anxiety. Tom's kitchen smelled like freshly brewed coffee and the kind of breakfast pastries that his wife liked to keep in the freezer for unexpected guests. Tom was a thin man with silver hair and the precise movements of someone who had spent decades working with complex machinery, but his manner was relaxed and welcoming. "So, what's going on with the family?" Tom asked as he poured coffee into 2 heavy ceramic mugs. Robert found himself telling the entire story, from Miranda's phone call to his own growing determination to resist her plans. Tom listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or frowning, but mostly just providing the kind of focused attention that Robert had been missing since Carmen's death. "It's a tough situation," Tom said when Robert had finished. "Susan and I have talked about this exact scenario. Our kids mean well, but they don't always understand what independence means to someone our age mean. The thing that bothers me most is that Miranda has already made the decision," Robert said. "She's not asking for my input or trying to find alternatives. She's telling me what's going to happen and expecting me to go along with it." Tom refilled their coffee cups and sat back down at the kitchen table. "What are your options? Legally, I mean." "That's what I'm hoping to find out this afternoon. I have an appointment with a lawyer to discuss property law and family matters." "Smart move. The thing is, Robert, even if you win the legal battle, you still have to live with the family consequences. Miranda's not going to be happy if you fight her on this." Robert had been thinking about the same issue. He loved his daughter, despite her current behavior, and he didn't want to destroy their relationship, but he also couldn't allow her to control his life based on her own fears and assumptions about aging. "Carmen made me promise that I wouldn't go quietly," Robert said. "She knew this day might come, and she wanted me to fight for my independence. I think she understood Miranda better than I did." Tom nodded slowly. Carmen was a wise woman. She always struck me as someone who thought several moves ahead. She used to say that Miranda was too much like her mother-in-law, too controlling for her own good. I defended Miranda at the time, but now I'm wondering if Carmen was trying to warn me. "What about your son? Is he as committed to this plan as Miranda is?" "David follows Miranda's lead on family matters. He's always been more passive, more willing to let her take charge. I think he genuinely believes that a nursing home would be safer for me, but he's not the one driving this decision." Tom stood up and walked to the window that overlooked his backyard, where a small vegetable garden was winding down for the season. "You know, Robert, there might be more options than you realize. Have you thought about what would happen if Miranda couldn't make decisions for you anymore?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the power of attorney situation changed? What if you took back control of your own affairs?" Robert had been so focused on defending his right to stay in his house that he hadn't considered the broader implications of the legal documents he had signed years earlier. The power of attorney had seemed like a simple precaution at the time, but now it was the weapon that Miranda intended to use against him. "I'm not sure how that would work," Robert said. "I'd have to ask the lawyer." "Just something to think about," Tom said. "Sometimes the best defense is a good offense." After leaving Tom's house, Robert spent the rest of the morning working in his garden, pulling weeds and preparing the flower beds for winter. The physical activity helped him think, and by the time he was ready to leave for his appointment with the lawyer, he had a clearer sense of what he wanted to accomplish. The law offices of Douglas & Associates occupied the second floor of a renovated Victorian house in downtown Denver, the kind of building that had been converted to professional use while maintaining its residential character. Sarah Douglas Chen turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with the same careful attention to detail that Robert remembered from her father, but with a more direct communication style. "Mr. Martinez, I understand you're dealing with some family issues related to your living situation. Why don't you tell me what's happening, and then we can discuss your legal options?" Robert explained the situation with Miranda, the nursing home ultimatum, and his own determination to remain in his house. Sarah took notes throughout his account, occasionally asking questions about specific details or dates. "The power of attorney document you signed," she said when he had finished. "Do you remember what type it was? Was it immediate, or was it contingent on your incapacitation?" "I don't remember the specific language. It was 20 years ago, and at the time it seemed like a simple precaution." Sarah opened a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Actually, we have your original documents here. Let me take a look." She spent several minutes reading through the papers, occasionally making notes or highlighting specific passages. Robert found himself holding his breath, waiting for her assessment. "This is interesting," she said finally. "The power of attorney you signed was specifically contingent on your being declared incompetent by 2 licensed physicians. As long as you're mentally and physically capable of making your own decisions, Miranda doesn't have the authority to override your choices." Robert felt a surge of relief. "So she can't force me into a nursing home?" "Not legally, no. But there are other considerations. If Miranda believes that you're no longer competent to make decisions, she could initiate proceedings to have you evaluated by medical professionals. If 2 doctors agreed that you were incapacitated, then the power of attorney would become active." "And what would constitute incapacitation in the eyes of the law?" Sarah consulted her notes. "Generally, it would require evidence of significant cognitive decline, inability to manage daily activities, or behavior that poses a danger to yourself or others. Forgetting to turn off a stove once or struggling with heavy garbage cans wouldn't meet that standard." Robert found himself smiling for the first time in days. "So I have more control over this situation than I thought."
You do, but I want to make sure you understand all the implications. If you decide to fight Miranda on this, it could create serious family conflict. Are you prepared for that possibility? "I've been thinking about that all morning," Robert said. "I love my daughter, but I can't live my life according to her fears. I need to maintain my independence, even if it costs me our relationship." Sarah nodded. "I understand. In that case, there are several steps we can take to strengthen your position. First, we can revoke the existing power of attorney and create a new one with more specific language about what constitutes incapacitation. Second, we can arrange for you to undergo comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations to establish your current competency. Third, we can explore other legal options that might give you more control over your affairs." "What kind of other legal options?" Sarah opened another file and pulled out several documents. "Well, for example, you could change the ownership structure of your property. Right now, I assume the house is in your name alone?" "Yes. Carmen and I owned it jointly, but after she died, the title transferred to me. You could transfer ownership to a trust, with yourself as the trustee. That would make it much more difficult for anyone else to force a sale or make decisions about the property. You could also designate someone other than Miranda as your successor trustee, someone who would be more likely to respect your wishes about remaining in your home." Robert had never considered the possibility of removing Miranda from her position of authority over his affairs, but now the idea seemed both logical and necessary. If she was willing to use her power to override his clear preferences, then perhaps she shouldn't have that power in the first place. "How long would it take to implement these changes?" he asked. "We could have the basic documents prepared within a week, maybe less if it's urgent. The medical evaluations might take a bit longer to schedule, depending on which doctors you choose." "It's urgent," Robert said. "Miranda is planning to take me on tours of nursing homes starting Monday. I'd like to have these protections in place before then." Sarah consulted her calendar. "I can have the trust documents and revised power of attorney ready by Friday afternoon. For the medical evaluations, I'd recommend Dr. James Morrison for the physical examination and Dr. Linda Foster for the psychological assessment. Both are well-respected and both have experience with competency evaluations in family disputes. Can you arrange those appointments? I can make the calls this afternoon. Given the urgency of the situation, they might be able to see you early next week." As Robert left the law office, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for months. For the first time since Carmen's death, he was taking active control of his situation, rather than simply reacting to other people's decisions. The afternoon sun was warm on his face as he walked back to his car, and he found himself looking forward to the conversation he would have with Miranda when she called about the nursing home tours. That evening, Robert called David in Phoenix. His son answered on the third ring, sounding distracted and busy. "Dad, good to hear from you. How are things in Denver?" "Complicated," Robert said. "Miranda tells me that you and she have decided I need to move to a nursing home." There was a pause on David's end of the line. "Dad, we're just concerned about your safety. Living alone at your age, in that big house, it's a lot of responsibility." "It's my responsibility, David. Mine to handle as I see fit. But what if something happens? What if you fall or have a medical emergency? Miranda and I live hundreds of miles away. We can't be there to help you if you need us."
Robert had heard this argument from Miranda, but coming from David, it sounded more like genuine worry than controlling manipulation. His son had always been the more anxious of his two children, the one who planned for every possible disaster. "I have emergency systems in place," Robert said. "Medical alert devices, neighbors who check on me, regular contact with my doctor. I'm not living in isolation, David." "But Dad, you're 72. Things can change quickly at your age. Wouldn't it be better to be somewhere with medical staff available around the clock? Not if it means giving up my home, my independence, my community. David, I built this house with my own hands. Your mother and I raised you children here. She died in our bedroom, holding my hand. This isn't just a building to me, it's my life." David was quiet for several seconds. "I understand that, Dad. I really do. But I also remember how hard it was when Mom got sick, how much you struggled to take care of her at home. We don't want you to go through something like that alone." The reference to Carmen's illness hit Robert harder than he expected. The final months of her life had been exhausting, frightening, and heartbreaking. There had been moments when he wondered if he was doing the right thing by keeping her at home, if she might be better served by professional medical care. But she had wanted to die in their bedroom, surrounded by the memories they had created together, and he had honored that wish despite the personal cost. "Your mother chose to die at home," Robert said quietly. "She chose to spend her final weeks in the place where she had been happiest. I'm choosing to live in that same place for as long as I'm able." "But Dad, that's different. Mom was sick. You're healthy now. But what happens when that changes? Then I'll deal with it when it happens. I won't spend my remaining healthy years in a nursing home just because I might need medical care someday." David sighed. "Miranda's going to be upset if you refuse to cooperate with the tour she's arranged."
Miranda's going to be upset regardless. She's already decided what she thinks is best for me, and she's not interested in my opinion. That's not concern, David. That's control. She loves you, Dad. We both do. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me is maintaining my independence and my dignity for as long as possible. What's best for me is living in my own home, making my own decisions, controlling my own life. If you and Miranda can't accept that, then we have a problem." After Robert hung up with David, he sat in his kitchen thinking about the conversation. His son seemed more conflicted than Miranda, more open to the possibility that their father might know what was best for himself. But David had always been easily influenced by his sister's strong opinions, and Robert doubted that one phone call would change the dynamic between his children. The next morning, Robert drove to Dr. Morrison's office for the medical evaluation that Sarah had arranged. Dr. Morrison was a man in his 50s with the kind of calm, professional manner that inspired confidence. He spent nearly 2 hours with Robert, conducting a comprehensive physical examination, reviewing his medical history, and asking detailed questions about his daily activities and mental state. "Mr. Martinez," Dr. Morrison said as the appointment concluded, "I want to be very clear about my findings. Physically, you're in excellent health for a man your age. Your blood pressure is well controlled, your heart is strong, your reflexes are normal, and your coordination is good. Mentally, you're alert, oriented, and capable of making complex decisions. I see no medical reason why you couldn't continue living independently for many years to come." "And you'd be willing to put that assessment in writing?" "Absolutely. I understand this evaluation is related to a family dispute about your living arrangements. Based on my examination today, I would strongly oppose any attempt to declare you incompetent or incapacitated." Dr. Foster's psychological evaluation the following day was equally thorough and equally positive. She administered a series of cognitive tests, discussed Robert's emotional state since Carmen's death, and evaluated his decision-making capabilities. "Mr. Martinez," she said at the end of their session, "you're dealing with normal grief responses to the loss of your spouse, but you're not depressed, you're not cognitively impaired, and you're clearly capable of making rational decisions about your own welfare. If someone is trying to force you into an institutional setting against your will, they're not acting in your best interests." By Friday afternoon, Robert had the revised legal documents in his possession. Sarah had worked with remarkable efficiency to create a comprehensive protection plan that would make it nearly impossible for Miranda to override his wishes about his living situation.
The new trust structure meant that the house was no longer directly owned by Robert, but by the Martinez family trust, with Robert as the sole trustee and beneficiary. Tom Nye had agreed to serve as the successor trustee, with specific instructions to honor Robert's preferences about remaining in the home for as long as he was physically and mentally capable. The revised power of attorney included much more specific language about what would constitute incapacitation, requiring not just 2 medical opinions but evidence of significant cognitive decline that affected Robert's ability to manage basic daily activities. Sarah had also included a provision that allowed Robert to revoke Miranda's authority at any time and designate someone else to act on his behalf. Most importantly, Sarah had prepared what she called the nuclear option, a document that would transfer ownership of the house to Tom Nye for $1, with a lifetime lease allowing Robert to remain in the property rent-free for as long as he lived. The arrangement would make it impossible for Miranda to force a sale of the house or use its value to pay for institutional care that Robert didn't want. "This is a drastic step," Sarah warned him. "Once you sign this transfer document, you won't own the house anymore. Tom would be the legal owner, although the lease agreement protects your right to live there. It's not something you can easily undo." "I understand," Robert said. "I don't want to use it unless I have to, but I want to know that the option exists." Saturday passed quietly. Robert spent the day working on small projects around the house, fixing a loose board on the back deck, cleaning out the garage, and generally preparing for whatever confrontation was coming with Miranda. He felt calmer than he had in weeks, knowing that he had legal protections in place and professional opinions supporting his competency. Sunday evening, Miranda called to confirm their appointment for the nursing home tour the following morning. "I'll pick you up at 9, she said. "Dress nicely, Dad. First impressions matter, and we want the staff to see that you're a respectable person who would fit in well with their community." "Miranda, we need to talk before we go anywhere." "We can talk in the car. I've printed out information about all 3 facilities, and I want to review their features and pricing with you." "No, Miranda, we need to talk now. I've decided that I'm not going on any nursing home tours." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Miranda spoke again, her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Dad, we've been through this. You can't keep living alone in that house. It's not safe, it's not practical, and David and I are not going to enable your stubbornness anymore." "My stubbornness? Is that what you call my desire to live in my own home?" "I call it a refusal to face reality. You're 72 years old, Dad. You're not getting any younger, and you're not getting any stronger. Every day you spend in that house alone is a day when something terrible could happen." "Miranda, I've had comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations done this week. 2 different doctors have certified that I'm competent to make my own decisions and physically capable of living independently. I'm not moving to a nursing home." "What doctors? I didn't authorize any evaluations." "You don't have the authority to authorize medical decisions for me unless I'm incapacitated, which I'm not. I arrange these evaluations myself through my own attorney." "Your attorney? Dad, what's going on? Why are you involving lawyers in this family matter?" Robert felt a cold satisfaction at the concern in Miranda's voice. For the first time in their recent conversations, she sounded uncertain, off balance. "I'm involving lawyers because you're trying to make legal decisions about my life without my consent. I'm involving doctors because you're questioning my competency without any medical evidence. I'm protecting myself, Miranda, because you've made it clear that you're not interested in protecting my rights or respecting my wishes." "Dad, this is crazy. David and I are trying to help you."
We're trying to make sure you're safe and well cared for. Why are you fighting us on this? Because you're not trying to help me, Miranda. You're trying to control me. There's a difference between concern and manipulation, and what you're doing is manipulation. Miranda's voice rose slightly. "I am not manipulating you. I'm trying to save your life. That house is too big, too isolated, too dangerous for someone your age. What happens when you fall down the stairs? What happens when you have a heart attack in the middle of the night? What happens when you forget to turn off the stove and burn the whole place down? What happens if I live happily in my own home for another 10 years? Robert countered. What happens if I maintain my independence, my dignity, and my connection to the community where I've lived for 30 years?
Why is your worst-case scenario more likely than my best-case scenario? Because I'm being realistic and you're being stubborn. No, Miranda, you're being controlling and I'm being independent. Those are very different things. There was another long pause. When Miranda spoke again, her voice was colder, more calculating. Dad, if you won't cooperate with this voluntarily, then David and I will have to pursue other options. We can't stand by and watch you put yourself in danger just because you're too proud to accept help. What other options? Legal options. Medical evaluations to determine your competency. If necessary, we'll petition the court to have you declared incapacitated of making decisions about your own welfare. Robert had been expecting this threat, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent a chill through him. His own daughter was threatening to have him declared mentally incompetent if he didn't submit to her will. Miranda, listen to me very carefully. I have already undergone medical and psychological evaluations. Both doctors have certified my competency in writing. I have revised my power of attorney to include much more specific criteria for incapacitation. I have created legal protections for my property that will make it impossible for you to force me out of my home. If you want to fight me on this, I'm prepared for that fight, but you're not going to win. Dad, what have you done? I've protected myself from my own children, which is something I never thought I'd have to do. Miranda was quiet for a long moment. Dad, I think you're making a terrible mistake. You're isolating yourself from the people who love you. You're being paranoid about our motives, and you're putting yourself in a position where something bad could happen and no one will be there to help you. Miranda, the only mistake I'm making is allowing this conversation to continue. I will not be going on nursing home tours tomorrow or any other day. I will not be moving out of my house. If you want to pursue legal action against me, that's your choice, but I'm prepared to defend myself. Dad, please don't do this. Please don't make us the enemy when we're only trying to help you. Then help me by respecting my decisions. Help me by supporting my independence instead of trying to destroy it. Help me by being my daughter instead of my adversary. I don't know how to do that when I think you're making such a dangerous choice. You learn how to do it, Miranda, or you lose your father while he's still alive. Robert hung up the phone before Miranda could respond, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. He had just declared war on his own children, had chosen his independence over their relationship, and while he believed he was doing the right thing, the cost was beginning to feel overwhelming. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical November weather in Denver. Robert made his usual breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, read the newspaper, and waited for the phone to ring. Miranda didn't call at 9 o'clock to ask why he wasn't ready for their nursing home tour. She didn't call at 10 or 11 either. The silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. At noon, Robert's doorbell rang. He looked through the window and saw Miranda's car in his driveway, along with a vehicle he didn't recognize. When he opened the door, Miranda stood on his front porch accompanied by a woman in her 30s wearing a professional suit and carrying a leather portfolio. Dad, this is Jennifer Walsh from Adult Protective Services. She'd like to speak with you about your living situation. Robert felt his stomach drop. Adult Protective Services. Miranda had escalated their dispute to the level of state intervention, had brought government officials to his home to question his competency and his safety. The betrayal was so complete that for a moment he couldn't find words to respond. Mr. Martinez said, her voice carefully neutral, I understand there are some concerns about your ability to live safely in your current environment. I'm here to conduct a wellness check and discuss available resources that might help you maintain your independence. May I see your identification? Robert asked. Jennifer produced an official badge and identification card. Mr. Martinez, this is a voluntary assessment. You're not required to let me into your home or answer my questions, but I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and see your living conditions. Robert looked at Miranda, who was standing slightly behind the social worker with an expression that mixed determination with guilt. His daughter had called the authorities on him, had initiated a process that could result in his removal from his home regardless of his own wishes. Come in, Robert said, stepping aside to allow both women to enter. I assume you want to see the house and evaluate whether I'm capable of maintaining it. Jennifer Walsh walked through Robert's home with the trained eye of someone who had conducted thousands of similar assessments. She looked for obvious safety hazards, signs of poor hygiene or neglect, evidence of cognitive decline or physical incapacity. Robert followed her through each room, watching her make notes in her portfolio, knowing that her observations could determine his future. "The house appears to be in good condition," Jennifer said after completing her tour. "Clean, well-maintained, no obvious safety hazards. Mr. Martinez, can you tell me about your daily routine? How do you manage tasks like cooking, cleaning, and personal care?" Robert described his typical day, from his morning routine through his evening activities.
He mentioned his volunteer work at the community center, his regular medical appointments, his social interactions with neighbors like Tom Nenway. He was careful to present himself as active, engaged, and competent. "What about emergency planning?" Jennifer asked. "Do you have systems in place to get help if you need it?" Robert showed her his medical alert device, explained his relationship with his neighbors, and described the informal support network he had maintained since Carmen's death. Jennifer took notes throughout his explanation, her expression remaining professionally neutral. "Ms. Hanson-Miller," Jennifer said, turning to Miranda, "can you explain your specific concerns about your father's welfare?" Miranda launched into the same litany of complaints that Robert had heard repeatedly over the past few weeks. The house was too big, he was too isolated, he was showing signs of decline, he needed professional supervision and care. She presented her case with the persuasive skill of a seasoned real estate agent, making Robert's quiet independence sound like dangerous neglect. "Mr. Martinez," Jennifer said when Miranda had finished, "how do you respond to your daughter's concerns?" "My daughter is confusing her anxiety with my reality," Robert said. "She's worried about hypothetical problems that haven't occurred and may never occur. She's using her fear of what might happen to justify taking away my actual autonomy." Jennifer spent another hour asking questions, reviewing Robert's medical records, and discussing his support systems. When she finally closed her portfolio, both Robert and Miranda were watching her with anxious attention. "Mr. Martinez, based on my assessment today, I don't see any immediate safety concerns that would warrant intervention. Your home is safe and well-maintained, you appear to be managing your daily activities independently, and you have adequate support systems in place. However, I do recommend that you and your family work together to develop a long-term care plan that addresses your daughter's concerns while respecting your preferences." Miranda's face flushed with frustration. "But what about the isolation? What about the risks of him living alone at his age?" "Ms. Hanson-Miller, your father is a competent adult who has the right to make his own decisions about his living arrangements, even if those decisions involve some level of risk. Living alone isn't inherently dangerous for someone who is mentally and physically capable. So you're just going to leave him here? You're not going to recommend any changes or interventions? I'm going to recommend that your father continue with his current arrangements while working with his family to address concerns and plan for future needs. Mr. Martinez, I encourage you to maintain regular contact with your doctor, continue your social activities, and consider what modifications might make your home safer as you age." After Jennifer Walsh left, Miranda remained in Robert's living room, her composure finally cracking under the weight of her unsuccessful intervention. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening to our family. Why are you fighting me so hard on something that would be good for you?" Robert sat down across from her, seeing his daughter clearly for perhaps the first time in months. Miranda looked exhausted, stressed, and genuinely confused by his resistance to her plans. Her controlling behavior might stem from actual concern rather than malicious intent, but the result was the same, an attempt to override his autonomy based on her own fears. "Miranda, when your mother was dying, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I would never let anyone put me somewhere I didn't want to be, that I would fight for my independence as long as I was able. I'm keeping that promise." "But Dad, Mom was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly about practical issues." "Your mother was thinking more clearly than anyone else in our family. She understood that independence and dignity matter more than safety and convenience. She knew that taking away someone's autonomy, even with good intentions, is a form of violence." Miranda wiped her eyes with the back of her hand.
I'm just so scared that something will happen to you and I won't be able to help. Something is going to happen to me eventually, Miranda. I'm going to get older, I'm going to get sicker, and I'm going to die. That's the human condition. But I want to live on my terms for as long as possible, and I need you to respect that choice. What if I can't? What if I'm too worried to just stand by and watch you take risks that seem unnecessary? Then you're going to have to find a way to manage your own anxiety without controlling my life. You're going to have to trust that I know myself better than you know me, and that I'm capable of making good decisions about my own welfare. Miranda gathered her purse and stood up to leave. Dad, I hope you're right about this. I hope you can maintain your independence for years to come. But if something happens, if you get hurt or sick or need help, I don't want you to be too proud to call me. I won't be too proud, sweetheart, but I also won't apologize for choosing to live my own life. After Miranda left, Robert called Sarah Douglas Chen to report on the Adult Protective Services visit and discuss his options moving forward. The good news is that the APS assessment was favorable. Jennifer Walsh's report will be part of the official record, and it supports your competency and your right to remain in your home. If Miranda tries to pursue legal action against you now, she'll have to overcome not just your medical evaluations, but also the state's own assessment. What about the nuclear option we discussed, the property transfer to Tom? I'd hold off on that for now. The APS visit was probably Miranda's strongest move, and it didn't work. She may be running out of legal options, especially with the revised power of attorney documents and the medical evaluations you've obtained. But you think she'll try something else? Maybe. Desperate people sometimes make desperate moves. But right now, you're in a very strong legal position. Just continue documenting everything, maintain your health and safety routines, and let me know if Miranda escalates the situation further. The next few days passed quietly. Robert resumed his normal routines, but with a heightened awareness of his vulnerability. Every time he stumbled slightly while walking, every moment of forgetfulness or confusion, he wondered if Miranda might be watching, gathering evidence for her next attack on his independence. On Thursday evening, David called from Phoenix. Dad, Miranda told me about the social services visit. I think maybe we need to step back and reconsider our approach here. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we've been pushing too hard, too fast. Maybe there are ways to address our concerns about your safety without forcing you out of your home. Robert felt a glimmer of hope. I'm listening. What if we looked into home modification services?
Things like grab bars in the bathroom, better lighting, maybe a stair lift if the stairs become difficult. What if we arranged for regular check-ins, maybe a housekeeper or a companion who could help with some of the heavier tasks around the house? Those sound like reasonable compromises, David. I'd be willing to consider modifications that would make the house safer without requiring me to leave it. And what about emergency planning? Maybe we could set up a system where you check in with one of us every day, or where neighbors have keys and permission to check on you if they're concerned. Robert found himself nodding, even though David couldn't see him. I already have some of those systems in place, but we could formalize them, make them more comprehensive. Dad, I want you to know that I never wanted this to become a fight between you and Miranda. I love you, and I want you to be happy. If staying in your house is what makes you happy, then I want to support that. What about Miranda? Is she willing to consider these alternatives? David was quiet for a moment. Miranda is struggling with this. She's always been someone who needs to feel in control of situations, and your resistance to her plans has been really hard for her to accept. But I think if we can come up with a compromise that addresses her safety concerns, she might be willing to back down from the nursing home idea. I hope you're right, David. I don't want to be estranged from my children, but I won't sacrifice my independence to avoid family conflict. I understand that now, Dad. Let me talk to Miranda, see if I can help her understand it too. Over the weekend, Robert spent time researching home modification services and aging-in-place resources. He was surprised to discover how many options were available for seniors who wanted to remain in their homes safely. Bathroom safety equipment, improved lighting systems, medical alert technologies, home maintenance services, even companion care programs that could provide social interaction and assistance with daily tasks without requiring institutional placement. On Monday morning, Miranda called.
Dad, David and I have been talking, and we'd like to propose some alternatives to the nursing home idea. I'm listening. What if we work together to make your house safer and more manageable? We could install safety equipment, arrange for regular help with maintenance and cleaning, set up better communication systems so we know you're okay. Those sound like reasonable suggestions, Miranda. I'd be willing to discuss specific options. The thing is, Dad, we'd want these changes to be comprehensive and professionally managed, not just a few grab bars and a housekeeper, but a complete assessment and implementation of aging-in-place modifications. Robert sensed that there might be conditions attached to Miranda's apparent compromise. What did you have in mind? There's a company called Senior Solutions that specializes in this kind of thing. They do home assessments, recommend modifications, coordinate with contractors and service providers, even help manage ongoing care needs. I'd like them to evaluate your house and your needs, then develop a comprehensive plan for keeping you safe at home. And if I agree to this assessment, you'll drop the nursing home campaign? If their assessment shows that you can live safely at home with appropriate modifications and support, then yes, I'll support your decision to stay there. Robert felt cautiously optimistic. And if their assessment recommends institutional care? Then I hope you'll consider their professional opinion seriously. It wasn't a perfect compromise, but it was better than the ultimatum Miranda had presented originally. Robert agreed to meet with Senior Solutions for a home assessment, with the understanding that he would maintain final decision-making authority over any recommended changes. The assessment took place the following Thursday. 2 representatives from Senior Solutions spent 3 hours going through Robert's house, evaluating everything from the height of light switches to the condition of the driveway. They interviewed Robert about his daily routines, his physical capabilities, his support systems, and his long-term goals for aging in place. Their report, delivered the following week, was comprehensive and generally positive. They recommended several modifications to improve safety and accessibility: grab bars in the bathrooms, improved lighting in hallways and stairways, a ramp for the front steps, and updates to the kitchen to make it more user-friendly for someone with potential mobility limitations. They also suggested services like weekly housekeeping, seasonal yard maintenance, and a daily check-in system. Most importantly, they concluded that with these modifications and services in place, Robert could safely remain in his home for the foreseeable future. Miranda's reaction to the report was grudging acceptance rather than enthusiasm, but she honored her commitment to support Robert's decision to remain at home. "I still think institutional care would be safer," she said during a family meeting to discuss the report, "but I can see that there are ways to reduce the risks of you living alone." "The key word there is reduce," Robert said. "There will always be some level of risk associated with independent living, just as there are risks associated with institutional care. The question is which risks I'm willing to accept in exchange for which benefits." David nodded. "I think we can all agree that keeping Dad at home is worth some level of increased risk, especially if we're taking reasonable precautions." Over the next month, Robert's house was transformed by a series of safety modifications. The changes were less dramatic than he had feared. Most of the equipment blended seamlessly into his existing decor, and the services were scheduled to minimize disruption to his routines. The daily check-in system turned out to be one of the most valuable additions. Each morning at 9 o'clock, Robert called a monitoring service to confirm that he was okay. If he failed to call by 9:30, the service would contact him. If they couldn't reach him, they would alert his designated emergency contacts and, if necessary, dispatch emergency services to his home. The system gave Miranda and David peace of mind while preserving Robert's privacy and independence. He wasn't being monitored constantly, but there was a safety net in place that would detect if something serious happened to him. By December, the new arrangements had settled into comfortable routines. Robert was still living independently in his own home, but with enhanced safety measures and support services that addressed most of his children's concerns. Miranda had stopped talking about nursing homes, and David seemed genuinely relieved that their father was happy and secure. But Robert's sense of victory was tempered by a growing awareness that this might be a temporary solution. The modifications and services were designed to help him age in place, but they couldn't stop the aging process itself. Eventually, his needs might exceed what could be provided at home, and he would have to face the same decisions all over again. For now, though, he was content to live one day at a time in the house where he and Carmen had built their life together. The morning routine of calling the monitoring service had become as natural as making coffee. The housekeeper who came twice a week was friendly and efficient. The handyman who handled seasonal maintenance was reliable and respectful. Most importantly, Robert was still making his own decisions about his daily life, still controlling his own schedule, still choosing how to spend his time and energy. The independence that Carmen had urged him to fight for was intact, even if it required more support than it had in the past. On Christmas Eve, Miranda and her family came for dinner. David and his wife flew in from Phoenix, and for the first time in months, the Martinez family gathered around Robert's dining room table without the shadow of conflict hanging over them. "Dad," Miranda said as they were clearing the dinner dishes, "I owe you an apology. I was so focused on what I thought was best for you that I forgot to listen to what you actually wanted. I'm sorry for pushing so hard and for not respecting your right to make your own choices. I understand why you were worried, sweetheart. I know your intentions were good, even when your methods were questionable. I still worry about you living alone, but I'm learning to trust that you know yourself better than I know you.
And the safety systems we've put in place help me feel more confident that you'll be okay." David raised his wine glass. "To Dad's independence and to finding ways to support each other without controlling each other." "To family," Robert replied, "and to the wisdom to know the difference between helping and interfering." As his children and grandchildren left that evening, Robert felt a satisfaction that had been missing from his life for many months. He had fought for his independence and won. But more importantly, he had found a way to maintain his autonomy while preserving his relationships with his children. The house was quiet after everyone left, but it was a peaceful quiet rather than a lonely one. Robert sat in his favorite chair, looking at the Christmas tree that Miranda had helped him decorate, thinking about Carmen and how proud she would be that he had kept his promise to her. Tomorrow he would call the monitoring service at 9 o'clock, confirming that he was safe and well in his own home. The housekeeper would come on Tuesday to help with the post-holiday cleaning. The handyman was scheduled to check the heating system later in the week. His independence was no longer absolute, but it was real. He was still Robert Martinez, still the man who had built this house with his own hands, still the husband who had honored his wife's dying wishes, still the father who had taught his children that some things were worth fighting for. The Christmas lights twinkled in the darkness outside his windows, and Robert allowed himself to hope that he would see many more Christmases in this same chair, in this same house, surrounded by the memories and the love that had sustained him through the most difficult year of his life. But even as he savored this moment of peace, Robert knew that the real test was yet to come. Miranda had backed down from her immediate campaign to institutionalize him, but she hadn't fundamentally changed her opinion about the risks of his living alone. The compromise they had reached was based on his current level of functioning. But what would happen when that functioning inevitably declined? Robert pushed those thoughts aside for now. He had won this battle, and that was enough for today. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, home. Spring arrived early in Denver that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that Robert felt in his bones. The modifications to his house had been in place for 3 months, and the routines of his enhanced independence had become second nature. The daily check-in calls, the twice-weekly housekeeper visits, the monthly maintenance appointments, all of it had settled into a comfortable rhythm that preserved his autonomy while addressing his children's safety concerns. But on a warm April morning, as Robert was working in his garden planting the tomatoes and peppers that Carmen had always insisted on growing, he noticed something that stopped him cold. His hands, which had been steady and strong for 72 years, were trembling slightly as he worked with the delicate seedlings. At first, he attributed it to the cool morning air, or perhaps too much coffee. But as the day progressed, the tremor persisted. That evening, Robert called Dr. Morrison's office to schedule an appointment. He didn't mention the tremor to Miranda or David during their regular phone calls that week, telling himself that it was probably nothing, that there was no point in worrying them over what might be a temporary condition brought on by stress or fatigue. Dr. Morrison's examination 2 weeks later was thorough and sobering.
After a series of tests and consultations with a neurologist, Robert received a diagnosis that he had been dreading: early-stage Parkinson's disease. The condition was mild and manageable with medication, Dr. Morrison assured him, but it would progress over time and eventually affect his ability to live independently. "How long do I have?" Robert asked, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant by the question. "That's impossible to predict with certainty," Dr. Morrison replied. "Parkinson's affects everyone differently. Some people maintain a high level of functioning for many years, while others experience more rapid progression. With proper medication and therapy, you could continue living independently for quite some time. But eventually, you'll need increasing levels of assistance." Robert drove home from the appointment in a daze, his mind struggling to process the implications of the diagnosis. For months, he had been fighting for his right to remain in his home, arguing that he was competent and capable of independent living. Now he faced the reality that his competence and capability would inevitably decline, regardless of his determination or his legal protections. That evening, Robert sat in his favorite chair, looking out at the garden where he had spent the morning planting vegetables he might not be able to harvest. The irony was bitter. Just as he had successfully defended his independence from his children's premature concerns, he was facing legitimate medical reasons that would eventually justify those same concerns. For 3 days, Robert kept the diagnosis to himself, going through the motions of his daily routines while wrestling with the question of when and how to tell Miranda and David. He knew that the news would vindicate their earlier push for institutional care, would provide them with the medical justification they had lacked during their previous campaign to move him to a nursing home. On Thursday evening, as Robert was preparing dinner, his phone rang. Miranda's voice sounded unusually strained. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react." "What is it, sweetheart?" "David and I have been doing some research into long-term care insurance and estate planning, and we've discovered something that we think you should know about." Robert felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of something?" "The house, Dad. The property values in your neighborhood have increased dramatically over the past year. Your house is now worth significantly more than we realized, probably close to $1.2 million. The number hit Robert like a physical blow. When he and Carmen had bought the house 30 years ago, they had paid $45,000 for it. Even accounting for decades of appreciation, the current value seemed almost incomprehensible. That's a lot of money," Robert said. "It is, Dad, and David and I are concerned about the tax implications and estate planning issues. If something happens to you, the inheritance taxes could be substantial. We think you should consider some financial planning strategies to protect the family's assets." Robert felt a familiar chill of suspicion. "What kind of strategies?" "Well, there are several options. You could transfer ownership of the house to a family trust, or you could sell the property and move to a smaller place that would be easier to maintain. The proceeds could be invested to provide income for your care while preserving the principal for inheritance purposes." There it was, the nursing home campaign disguised as financial planning advice. Miranda had learned from her previous failure that frontal assaults on Robert's independence were ineffective, so now she was approaching from a different angle, using estate planning and tax efficiency as justification for the same ultimate goal. "Miranda, are you suggesting that I sell my house?" "I'm suggesting that we explore all the options for protecting the family's financial interests while ensuring that you have the resources you need for long-term care." "Long-term care that would be provided where?" A pause. "Dad, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm talking about financial planning, not necessarily about changing your living arrangements." But Robert could hear the calculation in her voice, could sense that she was laying the groundwork for another attempt to move him out of his home. The Parkinson's diagnosis suddenly felt like ammunition that Miranda didn't even know she had yet. "Miranda, I appreciate your concern about estate planning, but I'm not interested in selling my house or transferring ownership to anyone else. This is my home, and I intend to live here for as long as I'm able." Dad, please, just think about it. David and I aren't asking you to make any immediate decisions.
We're just asking you to consider the financial realities and plan accordingly. After hanging up with Miranda, Robert poured himself a scotch and sat down to think through his situation with brutal honesty. His children were circling again, this time using financial concerns as their justification, and he had just received a medical diagnosis that would provide them with legitimate ammunition for their campaign. The convergence of these two developments felt like more than coincidence. The next morning, Robert called Sarah Douglas Chen to discuss the estate planning issues that Miranda had raised and to inform her about his Parkinson's diagnosis. The good news is that early-stage Parkinson's doesn't automatically affect your legal competency, Sarah said after Robert had explained both situations. The disease primarily affects motor function initially, and cognitive symptoms, if they occur at all, usually develop much later in the progression. But Miranda will use the diagnosis to argue that I need institutional care. She might try, but the medical reality is that people with early-stage Parkinson's can often live independently for years with proper medication and therapy. Your diagnosis doesn't change your legal rights or your decision-making capacity. What about the estate planning issues she raised? Sarah was quiet for a moment, reviewing notes. The property value increase does create some tax planning opportunities, but it doesn't require immediate action. You have several options that would protect your assets without forcing you to leave your home. Such as, you could establish an irrevocable trust and transfer the house to it while retaining a life estate that allows you to live there for the rest of your life. The transfer would remove the property from your taxable estate while guaranteeing your right to remain in the home. Alternatively, you could gift portions of the property value to your children annually, taking advantage of the annual gift tax exclusion. Those sound like reasonable alternatives to selling the house. They are. The question is whether Miranda and David would be satisfied with solutions that protect their inheritance while keeping you in your home, or whether they're using estate planning as a pretext for another attempt to move you to institutional care. Robert suspected the latter, but he decided to give his children the benefit of the doubt. He called David that evening to discuss the financial planning options that Sarah had outlined. "Those are interesting ideas, Dad. Let me run them by my accountant and see what he thinks about the tax implications." "David, I want to be clear about something. I'm willing to consider estate planning strategies that protect the family's assets, but I'm not willing to sell the house or move out of it. Any planning we do has to be compatible with my intention to remain here." "I understand, Dad. Let me do some research and get back to you." 2 weeks later, David called with what he described as a comprehensive financial analysis. "Dad, I've spoken with several experts and they're all saying the same thing. The estate tax exposure is significant if the property continues to appreciate at current rates. More importantly, the cost of long-term care could consume the entire value of the house within a few years if you need institutional care." "I don't need institutional care." "Not now, Dad, but statistics show that most people our age will need some form of long-term care before they die. The average cost of nursing home care in Denver is about $8,000 per month. Even with the modifications you've made to the house, there may come a time when home care isn't sufficient." Robert felt the walls closing in around him again. "David, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we need to plan for the possibility that you'll need institutional care at some point. If we wait until that becomes necessary, it'll be too late to protect the family's assets. But if we act now, while you're still healthy and competent, we can structure things to preserve the inheritance while ensuring that you have access to quality care when you need it. By selling the house? By converting an illiquid asset into liquid resources that can be managed more efficiently for care and inheritance purposes." Robert recognized the euphemistic language of financial planning being used to disguise the same old agenda. David and Miranda wanted him out of his house, and they had found a new set of arguments to justify their position. "David, I need to ask you something directly. Are you and Miranda planning another campaign to move me out of my home?" "Dad, we're trying to help you plan for your future financial needs. If that planning happens to include a change in your living arrangements, it's because the numbers dictate that outcome, not because we're trying to control your life."
The careful phrasing told Robert everything he needed to know. His children had learned to package their controlling behavior as financial prudence, but the underlying motivation remained the same. They wanted him in an institutional setting where professionals would be responsible for his care, and they wouldn't have to worry about his safety or independence. That weekend, Robert made a decision that surprised even him. He called Tom Nyan and asked if he would be willing to drive to Boulder for a conversation with Miranda. "You want me to talk to your daughter about your living situation? I want you to help me demonstrate something to her. She's convinced that elderly people can't live safely on their own, that independence inevitably leads to disaster. But you and I are living proof that's not necessarily true." Tom agreed to the meeting, and the following Saturday morning, the two men drove to Miranda's real estate office for what Robert described as a family conference about financial planning. Miranda seemed surprised to see Tom, but she welcomed both men into her office with professional courtesy. "Dad said you wanted to discuss estate planning and long-term care issues?" "Actually," Robert said, "I wanted Tom to be here because he's dealing with many of the same issues that you're worried about regarding my independence. Tom, would you mind telling Miranda about your current living situation?" Tom looked slightly uncomfortable with being put on the spot, but he answered Miranda's questions about his age, his health, his daily routines, and his support systems. As the conversation progressed, it became clear that Tom was successfully managing the same challenges that Miranda considered insurmountable for her father. "Tom lives alone in a house similar to mine," Robert said. "He's 74 years old, he's had 2 minor heart attacks, and he manages his own medications, his own finances, and his own daily care. His children live in California, but they don't insist that he move to institutional care, because they understand that independence has value even when it involves some level of risk." Miranda's expression tightened. "Dad, I appreciate Tom's situation, but every person is different. What works for Tom might not work for you." "What's different about my situation?" "Well, for one thing, Tom doesn't have Parkinson's disease." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Tom looked confused, and Robert felt his careful strategy crumbling around him. "How do you know about my diagnosis?" Robert asked quietly. "Dr. Morrison's office called to schedule a follow-up appointment, and when I answered your phone, they mentioned the Parkinson's consultation." "Dad, why didn't you tell us about this?" Robert felt cornered, exposed, caught in the web of his own secrecy. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd use it as ammunition for another campaign to institutionalize me." "We're not trying to institutionalize you, Dad. We're trying to help you plan for a future that's going to increasing medical needs and decreasing independence." Tom cleared his throat. "If I may interrupt, I think there's a misunderstanding here about what Parkinson's disease means for Robert's immediate future. Tom, I appreciate your concern, but this is really a family matter." "Miranda," Robert said, "Tom has more experience with medical challenges than you do. His wife lived with Parkinson's for 8 years before she died, and he was her primary caregiver throughout that time." Tom nodded. "Ellen was diagnosed with Parkinson's when she was 68. We made modifications to our home, arranged for support services, and she lived comfortably at home until the final 6 months of her life. The disease progressed slowly, and with proper medication and therapy, she maintained a good quality of life for years." Miranda looked skeptical. "But surely there were challenges, difficulties that required professional intervention." "Of course there were challenges, but most of them were manageable with planning and support. The key was maintaining Ellen's autonomy and dignity while providing increasing levels of assistance as needed." "What happened during the final 6 months?" Tom's expression grew sad. "Ellen developed dementia, which can be a late-stage complication of Parkinson's. At that point, she needed 24-hour care that I couldn't provide at home. We moved her to a memory care facility, but only after every other option had been exhausted." Miranda leaned forward. "So you do understand the need for institutional care in some circumstances." "I understand that institutional care is sometimes necessary, but I also understand that it should be the last resort, not the first option. Ellen and I had 8 good years at home after her diagnosis. If we had moved her to a facility immediately, we would have lost all of that time together." Robert felt a surge of gratitude toward his neighbor. Tom was articulating the position that Robert had been struggling to express, that independence had value even in the face of medical challenges, that quality of life couldn't be measured solely in terms of safety and medical supervision. "Miranda," Robert said, "I want you to understand something. I'm not asking you to ignore my Parkinson's diagnosis or pretend that it won't affect my future. I'm asking you to support my right to remain at home for as long as it's medically feasible, just as Tom supported Ellen's right to remain at home. But Dad, what if your condition progresses faster than expected? What if you need more care than we can arrange at home? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I won't spend my remaining healthy years in a nursing home just because I might need one eventually." The meeting ended without resolution, but Robert felt that he had at least forced Miranda to confront the complexity of the issues they were facing. The Parkinson's diagnosis was a factor in his future planning, but it wasn't an immediate disqualification from independent living. Over the next month, Robert began working with a physical therapist who specialized in Parkinson's disease. The exercises and strategies he learned helped him manage the tremor and maintain his balance and coordination. His neurologist adjusted his medications to optimize their effectiveness while minimizing side effects. Most importantly, Robert began educating himself about the disease, reading everything he could find about living with Parkinson's, talking to other patients through a support group, and developing realistic expectations about his future capabilities and limitations. The knowledge was empowering rather than discouraging. While Parkinson's was a serious condition that would eventually affect his independence, the progression was typically slow enough to allow for gradual adaptations and modifications. Many people lived with the disease for decades while maintaining active, fulfilling lives. In June, Robert made another decision that surprised his children. He enrolled in a community college course on estate planning and elder law, determined to become more knowledgeable about the financial and legal issues that Miranda and David kept raising. The course was taught by a retired attorney who had specialized in elder law for 30 years. Professor Williams was a woman in her 70s who brought both professional expertise and personal experience to her teaching. "The most important thing to understand about aging," she told the class during the first session, "is that it's not a disease to be cured, but a process to be managed. The decisions you make about your future should be based on your values and preferences, not on other people's fears or assumptions." Over the 12-week course, Robert learned about advanced directives, long-term care insurance, asset protection strategies, and the legal rights of elderly individuals. He discovered that he had far more options and protections than he had realized, and that many of the concerns Miranda and David had raised could be addressed without sacrificing his independence. The final project for the class was to develop a comprehensive aging-in-place plan that addressed medical, financial, and legal considerations. Robert threw himself into the assignment with the same determination he had once brought to construction projects. His plan included detailed contingencies for various stages of Parkinson's progression, financial strategies that protected his assets while ensuring access to care, legal documents that preserved his decision-making authority while providing appropriate safeguards, and support systems that could be scaled up as his needs increased. When Robert presented his plan to Miranda and David in August, their reactions were markedly different than he had expected. "Dad, this is impressive," David said, reviewing the financial projections and insurance strategies. "You've obviously put a lot of thought and research into this." Miranda was more cautious in her response, but she seemed genuinely surprised by the comprehensiveness of Robert's planning. "I have to admit, Dad, this addresses most of the concerns I've had about your future care needs. I'm particularly impressed by the way you've structured the long-term care insurance to cover home-based services before institutional care." "I learned something important in that class," Robert said. "Planning for aging isn't about preparing for failure or decline. It's about maintaining control and choice for as long as possible while being realistic about future needs." "What about the estate planning issues we discussed earlier?" Robert pulled out another set of documents. "I've established an irrevocable trust that removes the house from my taxable estate while guaranteeing my right to live here for life. The trust includes provisions for covering home modifications and care services as my needs change. Any remaining value will pass to you and David without estate tax consequences." Miranda and David exchanged glances. Dad, have you discussed this plan with your doctors? Do they think it's realistic given your Parkinson's diagnosis? Dr. Morrison and my neurologist have both reviewed the medical components of the plan. They agree that with proper management, I could potentially live at home for many years. The plan includes trigger points where we would reassess my capabilities and consider alternative arrangements if necessary. What kind of trigger points? Miranda asked. Cognitive decline that affects my judgment or safety, mobility problems that can't be managed with assistive devices, medical needs that require constant professional supervision, or social isolation that affects my mental health. Any of those conditions would prompt a review of my living arrangements. David nodded slowly. So you're not ruling out institutional care entirely, you're just insisting that it be based on actual need rather than hypothetical concerns. Exactly. I want to remain at home for as long as it's safe and appropriate, but I'm not so stubborn that I'd refuse necessary care out of pride or fear. The conversation that followed was the most honest and productive that Robert had had with his children since their original conflict began. For the first time, Miranda and David seemed to understand that their father's desire for independence wasn't reckless stubbornness, but a thoughtful choice based on his values and priorities. Dad, Miranda said as the meeting concluded, I owe you another apology. I've been so focused on worst-case scenarios that I forgot to consider best-case scenarios. You're right that you deserve the chance to age in place if that's what you want and if it's medically feasible. I appreciate that, sweetheart. But I also want you to know that I understand your concerns come from love, even when I disagree with your conclusions. What happens now? David asked. Now we implement the plan and adjust it as circumstances change. We stay in communication about my health and needs, but we base our decisions on actual conditions rather than hypothetical fears. As autumn arrived in Denver, Robert found himself settling into a new routine that balanced independence with appropriate support. His Parkinson's symptoms were well controlled with medication, and the physical therapy had actually improved his strength and coordination.
The tremor was still present but manageable, and it had stabilized rather than progressed. The support systems he had established were working smoothly. The daily check-in calls provided security without intrusion. The housekeeper had become a trusted helper who assisted with tasks that were becoming difficult for Robert to manage alone. The handyman maintained the property with the same attention to detail that Robert had once provided himself. Most importantly, Robert had rebuilt his relationship with Miranda and David on a foundation of mutual respect rather than parental authority or filial compliance. They spoke regularly about his health and needs, but the conversations were collaborative rather than confrontational. In October, Miranda surprised Robert by asking if she could bring her daughter Sophie to visit for the weekend. I want her to spend time with you while you're still active and independent, Miranda said. I want her to have memories of her grandfather as a strong, capable person, not just as someone who needed to be taken care of. The weekend visit was a revelation for Robert. Sophie, now 8 years old, was fascinated by her grandfather's workshop in the garage, where he still maintained his collection of woodworking tools. Despite the tremor in his hands, Robert was able to teach her basic carpentry skills, showing her how to measure and cut wood, how to use a hand drill, how to sand and finish a simple project. "Grandpa, will you teach me to build a birdhouse next time?" Sophie asked as the weekend concluded. "I'd be delighted to, sweetheart. We'll make it a special project, just for you." After Miranda and Sophie left, Robert felt a contentment that had been missing from his life for months. He was still living in his own home, still making his own decisions, still contributing something valuable to his family's life. The Parkinson's disease was a factor in his future, but it hadn't defined or limited his present. In November, Robert received an unexpected phone call from Jennifer Walsh, the Adult Protective Services caseworker who had evaluated his living situation months earlier. "Mr. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to follow up on your situation. I understand you've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I wanted to make sure you're aware of the community resources available to help you continue living independently." Robert was touched by her continued interest in his welfare. "Thank you for calling, Jennifer. I've been working with my family to develop comprehensive support systems, and things are going well so far."
I'm glad to hear that. I also wanted to let you know that your case has become something of a model for how families can work together to support aging in place. I've been sharing your story, with your permission, as an example of successful elder care planning. My permission is gladly given if it helps other families navigate similar challenges. The key seems to be your willingness to plan proactively for changing needs while your family learn to balance their concerns with respect for your autonomy. It's not always easy to find that balance. After the call ended, Robert reflected on how much his situation had changed since the previous winter when Miranda had first threatened to move him to a nursing home. The external circumstances were actually more challenging now than they had been then. He had a progressive neurological condition that would eventually affect his independence. But his sense of control and optimism was stronger than it had been in years. The difference, he realized, was that he was now facing his future as an active participant rather than a passive victim. He had educated himself about his options, planned for various contingencies, and built support systems that enhanced rather than replaced his independence. Most importantly, he had transformed his relationship with his children from adversarial to collaborative. As winter approached, Robert began planning for what he knew would be a significant test of his independence. Snow removal had always been a challenging task, but with his current physical limitations, it would be impossible for him to manage alone. Rather than waiting for Miranda to raise concerns about his safety, Robert proactively arranged for a snow removal service and discussed emergency protocols with his neighbors. The first major snowstorm of the season arrived in early December, dumping 8 inches of snow on Denver overnight. Robert woke to find his driveway and walkways professionally cleared, his newspaper delivered to his front door, and a message from Tom Nuyang asking if he needed any assistance with storm-related issues. When Miranda called that afternoon to check on him, Robert was able to report that he had navigated the storm successfully without any safety concerns or mobility problems. "Dad, I have to admit, I was worried about how you'd handle the first big snow with your Parkinson's, but it sounds like you've got everything under control. I've learned the importance of planning ahead and accepting help when it's appropriate. That doesn't make me dependent, it makes me smart." "You're right, Dad, and I'm proud of you for being so proactive about managing these challenges." The conversation was a far cry from the confrontational discussions they had been having a year earlier. Robert had demonstrated that he could maintain his independence while adapting to changing circumstances, and Miranda had learned to trust his judgment while offering appropriate support. As Christmas approached, Robert found himself looking forward to the holiday gathering with genuine enthusiasm. The past year had been difficult and transformative, but it had also been empowering. He had fought for his independence and won. But more importantly, he had learned how to maintain that independence while building stronger relationships with his children. On Christmas Eve, as he had the year before, Robert hosted dinner for Miranda, David, and their families. This time, however, the atmosphere was celebratory rather than tense. Sophie proudly showed off the birdhouse she and Robert had built together during her Thanksgiving visit. David announced that he had taken early retirement and would be moving back to Denver to be closer to family. Miranda presented Robert with a professionally bound copy of the Aging in Place plan he had developed, which she described as the most thoughtful and comprehensive care plan I've ever seen. "Dad," she said as they cleaned up after dinner, "I want you to know how much I've learned from watching you handle this year's challenges. You've shown me that aging doesn't have to mean giving up control or independence. You've also shown me that accepting help when it's needed is a sign of wisdom, not weakness. I've learned a few things myself, sweetheart. I've learned that family relationships can grow stronger through conflict if everyone is willing to listen and compromise. I've learned that planning for the future is empowering rather than depressing. And I've learned that independence isn't about doing everything yourself, it's about maintaining control over the important decisions in your life." David raised his wine glass. "To Dad's wisdom, courage, and stubborn determination to live life on his own terms." "To family," Robert replied, "and to the understanding that love sometimes means respecting each other's choices even when we don't fully understand them." As his family left that evening, Robert stood on his front porch watching their cars disappear into the snowy Denver night. The house behind him was quiet and warm, filled with memories of the life he and Carmen had built together and the new memories he was creating with his children and grandchildren. Tomorrow, he would call the monitoring service at 9 o'clock, confirming that he was safe and well in his own home. The physical therapist would come on Tuesday to work on his Parkinson's exercises. The neurologist had scheduled a checkup for the following week to assess his medication effectiveness. His independence was no longer the absolute autonomy of his younger years, but it was real and meaningful nonetheless. He was still Robert Martinez, still the man who had built this house with his own hands, still the husband who had honored his wife's memory by fighting for the life she had wanted him to live, still the father who had taught his children that some things were worth defending no matter the cost. The Christmas lights twinkled in the darkness, and Robert allowed himself to hope that he would see many more Christmases in this same place, surrounded by the love and respect that he had fought so hard to preserve. Whatever challenges the future might bring, he would face them as he had faced this year's trials, with courage, planning, and the unshakable conviction that dignity and independence are worth defending at any age. As he turned to go back inside, Robert caught sight of his reflection in the front window. An elderly man with slightly trembling hands and silver hair, but with straight shoulders and clear eyes that reflected a spirit unbowed by age or illness. He was exactly where he belonged, exactly who he had always been, exactly the man that Carmen had fallen in love with, and the father that Miranda and David had finally learned to respect. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Robert Martinez settled into his favorite chair for another evening in the home he had refused to surrender, in the life he had refused to let others define for him. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.